Hi, I'm Danny with Tax 29 Tax Service.
And I'm Andy. You know, Danny, the prices of everything keeps going up and up.
Inflation.
Well, at Tax 29, we said enough. We're keeping our pricing structure the same this year as what we had last tax season.
So whether you file in one of our local offices or whether you file with us online at tax29.com, you'll get the same professional tax prep at affordable pricing along with year-round service.
For a list of our pricing or to find out more, stop by one of our local offices or visit us at tax29.com.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.
Welcome to Discovering His Story, a production of Youngstown Christian Television. In this program, we're looking at background to the Bible, to the biblical events, and also seeing the characters of the Bible as being real people having an influence on the real world. We're in the section of ancient times in which we're talking about the civilization of Greece. To this point, we have been looking at the very beginnings of Greek civilization, which may not seem to have a lot of relevance to the Bible, but you're going to see that this is all background leading up not only to events that occur in relationship to God's people, but also are events that have a relationship to even our lives today and to Christianity in general. So we were looking at Athens last time, and we saw that there were four main social classes in Athens: the slaves, the medics, the women, and the citizens. Slavery was a dominant feature of the ancient world, and so they provided a fundamental part of the economy. The most prized slaves, unlike modern slavery, or in the 19th century especially, the slavery that occurred in this country was very different than the slavery of the ancient world. The most prized slaves worked as tutors and police officials. And one group of elite slaves was even empowered to herd citizens to the assembly with a long rope dipped in paint. Next in status were domestic slaves, who under certain circumstances might be allowed to buy their own freedom. Often looked upon as one of the family, during certain festivals, they would be waited upon by their masters. Lowest of all slaves were those who worked in the nearby Laurium silver mines, where most quickly perished. Another group of people in this society were the women. Most young Greek women would be married at about the age of 14 to a man roughly twice her age. Prior to the marriage ceremony, the couple would probably have met only a few times. And while the bride would normally be a virgin, the husband almost certainly was not. Whether the couple found each other attractive was only of secondary importance. And the young bride would have been selected mainly for her dowry, that is, the payment her father would give her husband, her fertility or prospective fertility, and her skills at such things as weaving. Despite this, the marriage ceremony was itself rather romantic and would be sealed when the husband lifted his bride's veil and stared into her eyes. Once married, a respectable Greek wife would be confined primarily to the household, since even shopping was a husband's job. Her opportunities for socializing was therefore quite restricted, though wives might meet their friends at the local water fountain during major festivals and for the performance of cult ceremonies. Divorce was not uncommon and had little of the stigma that later Christian civilization would attach to it, and women could, and frequently did, remarry. Next, I want to take us back to the Agora. Now, the Agora in Athens is not available to be seen today. So I've substituted this picture of the Agora in Ephesus, thinking that it's probably much the same. That, of course, was the marketplace and was the major focus of everyday affairs in the city, and was particularly spacious. In Athens, it was 100 by 200 meters. Trade of all kinds took place there, including not just ordinary goods, but there were also barbershops, bathhouses, perfume vendors, drinking establishments, and brothels. Custom dictated that respectable women and young men should be absent from the Agora until after midday, though in fact lower class women would often be present from the early morning, selling such things as food and bread. Bread sellers were notoriously loudmouthed and vulgar. This is a picture of the marble street outside one of the shops in the Agora, and the marks that are given there, that you see there in the concrete, identify the shop. And public restrooms, you might ask? Yes. There was the public latrine. This free public toilet served the citizens as well as visitors of the adjacent various bath. The seats of the latrine were arranged around three sides of the open colonnaded courtyard. Fresh water flowed in the channel in front of the seats. You see it there? Looks like a little gutter in front of the seats. And that was for washing your hands or washing the sponge that you might use to clean yourself. And so this was the one in Ephesus. Is pretty much the same all over. Notice there are no dividers between seats. It was very communal. Now, let's have a little quiz about Sparta and Athens. If you're here with us last week, you learned about Sparta and some about Athens, and this week we've added some more information about Athens. All right, so think about this. Which had the largest population? And you can guess among yourselves and have a little contest here. The winner should get a prize. Okay, what about government? Which was a limited democracy? Well, the answer to that is Athens. Okay, which was a military oligarchy? The answer is Sparta. Which had two kings? Sparta. Which had an assembly? It's kind of a trick question because I think both of them you could say had an assembly. Which had citizens as the upper class? Well, again, you could probably say both of them. Athens is one that we talked about that had citizens as the upper class. Which had foreigners as a working class? We didn't really talk about that, but that would most likely be Sparta. Which had slaves? Yeah, both of them did. Which was the leader of the Delian League? Well, that would be Athens. We haven't talked about that yet. The leader of the Peloponnesian League, we did talk about, and that's Sparta. Which had the strongest navy? That's Athens. Which had the strongest army on land? That would be Sparta. Which had militaristic values? Sparta. Which had democratic values? Athens. Which limited women's role in politics? Well, they both were limited to some extent. I think the most limited would have been Sparta, and the most freedom to women would have been Athens. Education, which valued choral dance and music? Well, to different degrees, they both did. Sparta valued it for the militaristic value of dance, but Athens really used choral dance and music more. They were more into the arts. Which valued athletics? You'd have to say probably Sparta on that one. Now I want you to take a look at this chart. On the left, we have some Greek words with English transliterations. The ancient Greek meaning then, and the English derivative. So, in parentheses, you have the pronunciation of the Greek letters that are there. The first one is the word academia, which becomes the academy. The next is barbaros, or barbaros, which the ancient meaning was a barbarian or a foreigner. And that came as a result of the Greeks being somewhat arrogant toward foreigners and saying that when these foreigners talked, they were speaking gibberish and it just sounded like they were saying bar, 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 bar. And so they called them barbarians, barbaros. In barbarian is the word we use today. The Greek word blasphemia, for the Greeks, that was profanity or slander, and our word blasphemy. The word character, for the ancient Greeks, that was a brand, a stamp, or a mark. For us, we use the word character as kind of a brand of who the person is. Then there's kritikos, which means discerning. We have the word critic, or to be critical, discerning, or to judge. The word kritikos is used in an area of judging as well. For example, in a criminal trial. Then there's despotes, which is the word master or the meaning is master in Greek. We have the word despot that comes from that. And then we have dynamikos, which in ancient Greek meant powerful, but not in the sense of like explosive power. Our word dynamite comes from this. But for the Greeks, the word dynamos has more the idea of ability. So power in the sense of having the ability to do something. And our word dynamic also comes from that. The word hygiene, well, that's obvious in the Greek meaning and in the English meaning. Then there's ostracismos. For the Greeks, that was ostracism, and it's the same for the English derivative. Then we have poetes. This is a creator or a poet, and our word poet comes from that. Poetes. Next we have praktike, which is the word for business, practical knowledge, and our word practical comes from it. Then there's stoikos. Our word, or their word for the philosophy of Stoicism comes from that. You're a Stoic, and we use the same word in English. Then there's schale, which is free time, leisure, discussion, and we use it for school. Not exactly a time of free time or leisure, although I'm afraid that's taking place a lot more in school than it used to. Then there's tyrannos, which is a tyrant or dictator, and we use the same word today. So you can see there are a lot of words in the English language that come directly from Greek words. Now, I want us to do another exercise. You can see on the left here the Greek language, the uppercase letters and the lowercase letters from alpha to omega, and the English equivalents beside them. All right, and of course the New Testament was written in Greek, and on the upper right-hand side you see the famous John 3:16 in Greek with the English transliteration below it. And so literally it is, so for loved God the world that the Son His, the only begotten He gave, that everyone believing into Him not should perish, but should have life everlasting. Many Greek words have come directly or almost, have come directly or almost directly into English, as we just saw. But here are some other words. So using the chart on the left, see how many you can recognize. Start with the one on the upper left and move across and then go down to the bottom row. So look at the first one there. Okay, look at the Greek letters and see if you can figure out what English word that is. Okay, this should have been relatively simple. That is in Greek pronounced ego, but our word is ego. I'll look at the next one just to its right. If you said cosmos, you would be correct, and our word is the cosmos. Means world or world system. Okay, the next one to the right. This will be a little bit harder. The Greek word is marturos. Saying it out loud might help. Marturos is our word martyr. Originally it simply meant a witness, but so many of the early Christian witnesses were killed for their faith that the word martyr came to mean someone who is killed for their faith. All right, next look at the one to the right of martyros. That is the Greek word synagoge. Synagoge. Now, does that sound familiar? It's our word synagogue. Synagoge. Okay, now below ego, look at that word and see if you can figure that one out. That's the word eureka, or eureka, we say. I found it. Okay, the next one to the right. This might be a little easier. Okay, that's the Greek word krisis, or our word is crisis. Okay, the next one to the right. This is a fun one. The word is mysterion. What's our word? Mystery. And the last word, it's got that funny letter at the beginning, which is a PH sound, and that is phone. Phone is the word we have phone, like telephone, phone call, all those things, has to do with sound. So, again, many Greek words that have come into our language. All right, let's get back to the history of Greece, and we're going to look next at what's called the Fateful Century, which includes the Persian Wars. We've already talked a little bit about that in relationship to Persia, but we'll approach it maybe more from the Greek standpoint this time. Many Greek colonists had set out from mainland Greece, evicted by the Dorians, and ended up in Ionia in Asia Minor. Since they were there, the Ionian Greeks came under the rule of the Lydians and King Croesus, who we talked about some months ago. And eventually the Persians took over, and so these Greeks were under Persian rule. The Ionian Greeks found the Persian rule oppressive and attempted a revolt with the help of the mainland Greeks. So as the Persian Empire spread westward into Asia Minor, conquering the Lydians and the Greek colonies, those colonies ended up rebelling with the help especially of Athens and overthrew the Persian rule. So at that point, the Persians began to notice mainland Greece and decided to make war with them for their interference. So with mainland Greece invading Ionia, now under Persian rule, it created a lot of tension and anger, causing both countries to fight back. As you may remember, Darius I put down the revolt in Asia Minor and then sought to punish Athens, landing at the Bay of Marathon in 490 BC. Again, you remember the Greeks surprised the Persian army with a charge and fierce fighting that brought the Greeks the victory. The Athenian force was strongest on its two flanks and weakest in its middle. So when the flanks routed the Persians, they were facing instead of pursuing them, and they returned to assist the weakened center. In this way, they achieved victory along the whole front. So if they had stayed out there on the perimeter, the Persians might have broken through the Athenian center, but instead, these flanks returned to the middle and evened out, fighting against the entire front of the Persians. The figure of 192 Athenian casualties is probably accurate, though this does not take into account the casualties among the Plataeans who were fighting, nor the probably small number of slaves who fought in the battle in exchange for their freedom. It is thought that the reported figure of 6,400 Persians slain was probably an exaggeration, but not excessively so. And who knows? The Persians had a huge army, and they were willing to sacrifice a large number in order to attain victory. Well, as you remember, a runner was dispatched to carry the good news back to Athens, around 25 miles away. Upon reaching his destination and delivering the message, the runner fell over dead and has been immortalized since with the running of marathons. Well, so at the Battle of Marathon, there's the date. It was the first victory over the Persians. The army of Athens was about 1/3 the size of the Persians. And there are the figures for the Athenian army and the way in which the Greeks won. They managed to fight off a second Persian force and defend the city. All right, so here's how the Battle of Marathon looked. You can see in red the Persian army and how they are flanked on either side by the Athenians. You can see that the line there for the Athenians is a little bit thicker, and as they pushed back the Persians and were victorious on the flank, they then turned back to the middle and secured the victory there. And there is the runner taking back the news. Now Darius, the king who initiated this, died before being able to carry out revenge. But his son Xerxes, as you remember, gathered together a great army a decade later, crossed the Hellespont on a bridge made of boats, and invaded Greece. Across the Hellespont, the narrow channel of water separating Europe from Asia, he had constructed 2 bridges, each made of over 300 ships, tied together by a network of ropes. On the coast, a fleet of some 1,200 ships amassed, while on land over 100,000 soldiers made camp at Sardis in Turkey, awaiting their orders. Faced with such an overwhelming force, most of the Greek cities decided to ally themselves with the benevolent rule of the Persians, and so only a small confederacy of city-states, led by Athens and Sparta, determined to resist Xerxes. At most, they possessed some 30,000 men and a few hundred ships. By the spring of 480, Xerxes' army had reached Macedonia in the north of Greece. In response, a contingent of 300 Spartans and several thousand allies were sent to occupy the narrow mountain pass of Thermopylae, not far from the Greek fleet that was anchored off the nearby coast at Artemisium. 300 Spartans took a stand against the advancing Persian army of several 100,000 at the mountain pass of Thermopylae in a suicide mission designed to delay the invaders enough to give the other Greek city-states time to gather their forces. And again, here's a picture of the mountains. Oops, something happened here. There, the mountains on one side of Thermopylae Pass. Led by King Leonidas, the Spartans heroically held the Persians at bay for nearly a week until, outnumbered, betrayed, and outflanked, they were finally defeated. But they had delayed Xerxes and protected the majority of the Greek army from destruction. There are the details. Interestingly, the British held the same pass against German advance in World War II, but they were also surrounded and overwhelmed. Leonidas died fighting, and a fierce battle was fought over his body. The Persians pushed back 4 times. Arrows finally killed the last Spartans, and the body of Leonidas was beheaded and crucified. The bravery of these men is still looked back on today. Well, Xerxes moved easily to Athens, which he then burned to the ground, as you remember from our previous study. The inhabitants having escaped to the nearby island of Salamis. According to Herodotus, Themistocles sent his slave Cynicus in a boat to Xerxes, where he delivered the following message. The general of the Athenians sent me without the knowledge of the other Greeks, for he is on your side and wants you, rather than the Greeks to win, to say that they are afraid and planning to run for it. You can now achieve a brilliant coup if you don't sit by and watch them run. They are not in agreement among themselves, and so will not oppose you. Their naval battle, as you will see, will be against each other, those on your side and those not. Well, Themistocles is believed to have made Cynicus a free and wealthy man for his efforts, and so thereby Xerxes was deceived into attacking the Athenian ships in the strait between the mainland and Salamis. Xerxes' huge ships were unable to maneuver and were defeated by the Greek vessels. Sparta led the Greeks into victory against the Persian army the next year at the Battle of Plataea. Here is a picture of the Athenian ship called a trireme for its 3 rows of oars. Here's maybe a better representation. You can see what the Athenian ships look like. And here's a picture of the battle between the larger Persian vessels and the smaller Athenian. And on the map you can see the movements, how the Persians are all bottled up in the bay and the Greeks were able to maneuver around. Here is another drawing of the Athenians and the points on the end of their boats enabling them to ram the other ships. Here's a more detailed examination of the battle. The Athenians felt the Persian War was a defining moment in their history. The victory over Persia made Athens one of the strongest city-states in Greece. Wealth followed. Many states started looking toward Athens instead of Sparta. The alliances that Athens made after the victory, as well as the Delian League, would catapult it into immense power, making Athens the cultural center of the Greek world. The Spartans grew increasingly frightened of Athenian power. Though Athens had this great amount of power, it would also cause their downfall, eventually leading to the Peloponnesian War. And this war would be between the 2 main Greek city-states, Athens and Sparta. And we'll cover that next time on Discovering His Story.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.